over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. She opened the earth, rocking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws.
Good afternoon and welcome back. Ramzi Baroud has a piece entitled Trump's Gaza Plan, a Green Light for Ethnic Cleansing. He writes, quote, U.S. President Trump's latest proposal to take long-term ownership of Gaza to clean out the so-called mess and to turn it into a, quote, Riviera of the Middle East, end quote, is just the latest iteration of efforts aimed at ethnically cleansing Palestinians from their homeland, end quote. Ramzi lists three primary concerns. First, Israel may interpret Trump's words as a green light to push Palestinians out of Gaza or the West Bank. Second, the U.S. could tacitly endorse another Israeli offensive under the guise of fulfilling the president's wishes. And third, Trump's remarks suggest his foreign policy on Palestine will remain largely unchanged from his predecessors. What's the current reality in the region and what can we project going forward? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Let's welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they take place or occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events occur. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between the broader historic context and events in which they take place, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is Donald Trump's policies in the Middle East and his sanctions regime. Is there a method to this madness? Let's discuss this with my guest. He's an activist, journalist, and lawyer, Dimitri Lascaris. Dimitri, welcome to the show.
Always a pleasure, Doctor. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I know you're giving us time late in the evening for you, joining us from Greece. I greatly appreciate it. While then Secretary Blinken reiterated that Palestinian civilians must not be pressed to leave Gaza, Biden created the conditions for displacement through unconditional military support for Israel. This is from Ramzi Baroud's piece. Trump's latest proposal is to take long-term ownership of Gaza, which, by the way, was also proposed by Biden. Talk about this as an American foreign policy instead of it being an administration-specific policy.
Well, we've not only witnessed there's been an outright genocide beginning in October 20.
So I think we're having a bit of a go ahead, Dimitri. If you could start that. You broke up on us. Start that again, please.
Apologies. My internet connection up here on a mountain in Greece is not always the best.
I understand. Go ahead and start that again.
So the point I wanted to make at the outset is that we've not only witnessed an ethnic cleansing in Gaza, we've witnessed an outright genocide, the worst crime that a human being can commit, with the multifaceted support of the Biden administration and the Republicans. It was bipartisan from day one. What has happened? So it's not Trump's ethnic cleansing plan. It is a long-term goal of Israel to remove the Palestinians from their homeland. And what Israel has done over the years has resorted to increasingly savage forms of barbarism, because the ones they had employed up until that point in time were not successful in persuading the Palestinians to leave, quote unquote, voluntarily. So they took it to a whole new level under Biden. And when Trump took office, the Israelis had a problem. The problem was the Palestinians hadn't left. Sisi, who came under pressure, there were reports, credible reports, he came under pressure from Blinken early in the genocide to accept a large number of Palestinian refugees into the Sinai desert. He refused that. And so you have however many people survived this genocidal onslaught, refusing to leave. And even if they could be forced to go, there's nowhere to go. And Hamas, meantime, is still very much in charge, very much a fighting force. And I believe that during the ceasefire, they've probably been preparing themselves for the next assault. That would be the logical thing for them to do, given Israel's historic behavior. So all Trump is trying to do here, I mean, let's just be clear. He's trying to find a place for these people whom Israel was trying to expel from Gaza using the most barbaric methods imaginable, with the full support of the Biden administration. And any takers, at least not publicly. So he's in a quandary.
In fact, that right there takes me to my next question, because with the continued ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, it has been rejected by all leaders in the region. Egyptian President El-Sisi has addressed the issue multiple times, warning of Israeli efforts and possibly U.S. involvement in a population transfer scheme, as what he calls it. He stated, insisting that such an outcome should not be accepted, and then subsequently stated Egypt would not participate in this, quote, act of injustice, end quote. Abdullah in Jordan said similar things. MBS in Saudi Arabia has made similar statements. But do you see them over time succumbing to the U.S. pressure, or will their domestic politics force them to hold the line?
I would hope the latter, and I think probably that's what's going to happen. So you may have noticed, Wilmer, that in November, MBS actually described what Israel was doing as a genocide.
Mm-hmm.
Whether he himself cares about the victims of that genocide is a serious question, and one that probably rational people would answer no. He doesn't. His behavior has certainly suggested that, but he's keenly aware of the fact that the people in his country are enraged, as they are throughout West Asia, by what has transpired. And in fact, very early on in this genocide, before the full horror of it became apparent to the world, there was a poll done in Saudi Arabia in which people were asked how they wanted the monarchy to respond, and 96% said that they wanted Saudi Arabia to sever ties with Israel. 96%. It's hard to imagine, a greater level of unity than that in the real world. In Jordan, the situation is probably even more severe, because there are millions of Palestinians in Jordan itself. And of course, Sisi, the dictator of Egypt, the man whom Donald Trump likes to refer to as his favorite dictator, is obviously aware that one of his predecessors, Anwar al-Sadat, was assassinated for doing a peace deal with Israel that was viewed by many in the region as being a betrayal of the Palestinian people. So it's not that they care about Palestinians per se, it's that they care about their own survival. They care about the stability of their regimes. And I think they probably view this as a bridge too far in a situation that is already ripe for a social explosion because of what people have endured in West Asia over the past 16 months.
in terms of your talking about the worldview, I read Ireland has just imposed a boycott on the importation of items from Israel. If dates or olives are produced in occupied space, Ireland says they will be removed from store shelves. And
Mhm.
you know, a lot of people aren't really aware of the relationship between the support that Ireland has been showing with the Palestinians.
Yes, and it's not just Ireland. It's sort of been three states in the European Union, which overall has responded to this genocide abominably, that have at least made some effort to protect the Palestinian people. And those states are Ireland, Belgium, and Spain. Spain, during the last 16 months, refused to allow tankers that were carrying military jet fuel to Israel to dock in Spanish waters. So Ireland is not the only one that has taken some form of concrete action against Israel. And there also they've supported these governments to varying degrees, the efforts of South Africa to hold Israel accountable before the International Court of Justice. So on the whole, however, these developments are happening at a glacial pace in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
If one of the major states broke ranks with the Americans on this, that could potentially be a game changer. But unfortunately, when I say major states, I'm referring principally to France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. I've seen no indication that those governments, the ones that are currently in power, will break ranks. And in fact, a representative of the British government just told the BBC, I believe it was, that what happened on October 7th, 2023 was a genocide. He described what happened to Israelis that day as a genocide, but refuses to say that the mass murder of 17,000 Palestinian children or more is a genocide. So this is the prevailing attitude amongst the elites. Now, one thing that could be transformative is if, for example, there were an election held in France and, the left, which I think would readily, the French left, which would readily withdraw support for Israel, came to power. In Germany, the party most likely to replace the two legacy parties, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats, is the AfD, regrettably, and they seem to be extraordinarily supportive of Israel. In the UK, certainly the Starmer government, I can't imagine that Starmer would break ranks, but he's in serious trouble politically. He's done an amazing job of plumbing the depths of unpopularity within a few months of coming to power with a huge majority. And, there are indications he's not going to last very long. If he were to be replaced by somebody who actually reflects the popular sentiment, the grassroots sentiment within the Labour Party, that could be a game changer. But as I say, the current governments, Macron and the prime minister he's appointed, the Social Democrats or the CDU, if they replace them in Germany, and the Starmer-led Labour Party in Britain are 100% supportive of this genocide, and in fact are totally complicit. They themselves should be in the dock at The Hague, tried for crimes against humanity.
We hear a lot on the political side as it relates to Netanyahu. But what we don't hear really in the West is the impact that this is having domestically in Israel as it relates to Israelis. And I know you in Kalamata, Greece, you are much closer to this than I. You see a lot more of the practical and day-to-day impact that this is happening that this is having. I'm sorry, on the Zionist colony. Talk about. Let us know what you see on a daily basis.
Well, up until very recently, and I've only been back in Greece for a couple of weeks and haven't had an opportunity to go out and see what's going on in the public too much. But certainly before I left Greece in November of last year, there were an extraordinary number of Israelis in Greece. They were all over the place. This was very unusual. I mean, there's always been some level of tourism in Greece from Israel, but this was unprecedented in my view. Also in Cyprus, huge influx, and this was something that was talked about by the Israeli press and the Cypriot press. I have, people I know in Morocco said they saw a large influx of Israelis to Morocco. Now it's hard to ascertain what proportion of what exactly the number is and what proportion of these people will not go back. But I think that the country has definitely suffered a significant outflow of Jewish Israelis, and many of them will not come back. And the ones who are, I think, least likely to come back are those who are the most employable and have better opportunities, for example, in Western countries, or good opportunities economically speaking. So Israel has suffered to some degree a brain drain, which is very difficult to measure. Its government debt is slightly above junk level. It received, I think, 2 downgrades during the genocide. I was actually in Israel and occupied Palestine in March of last year, and I went to the port of Eilat on the Red Sea. It was a ghost town. There was absolutely no activity at the commercial port, not even workers walking around. And the port facility declared bankruptcy after I visited and saw that it was effectively out of operation thanks to the attacks of Ansar Allah in the Red Sea. And you talk to people, I interviewed Shir Hever, who left Israel as an act of protest and is an economist. And he told me that this was 6 months ago, that the Israeli economy was a disaster zone. So you have economic impacts. There was a report just done by an independent expert in Israel that found that something in the range of 3 million Israelis are exhibiting signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. The military is overstretched. There has been a surge in suicides. Thousands of soldiers, perhaps in excess of 10,000, are permanently disabled. And there were reports in the Israeli press that a growing number of reservists were not showing up when they were called to go back into action in Gaza or Lebanon. So Israel's in real trouble. I think arguably the best hope that the Palestinian people have is the Israelis themselves, in the sense that they're behaving in a way that is going to lead ultimately to the collapse of their country, their society, and their state. And we should do everything we can to help them. As far as I'm concerned, Wilmer, states do not have an inherent right to exist. You can forfeit that right, assuming that any state has a right to exist. And if a genocide doesn't justify a forfeiture of the so-called right to exist, I don't know what does. Israel should no longer be permitted to exist. There should be one state. People from the Israeli Jewish population who are prepared to live in peace with Palestinians as equal citizens should stay. And those who are not willing to do so should leave. And I think a lot of them are doing just that.
Well, and that's a great point, which takes us to the discussion of those that still champion either championing a 2-state solution, or say that at this point a 2-state solution is virtually impossible. Well, okay, then let's just make it a democracy. Let's one person, one vote. If it's good enough, if a representative democracy is good enough for the United States, then just let it be fair. One person, one vote, and we could move on with our day.
All the U.S. has to do is stop providing weaponry to Israel, and that's exactly what's going to happen. But I think you are dealing, Wilmer. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the polls reflect that this is a profoundly racist society.
Yes,
the Israeli Jewish population has been so radicalized in their racial hatred. I don't think that a large number of the Israeli Jewish population would be willing to live in a state with the Palestinians as equals. I think the vast majority of them would be violently opposed to that. So ultimately, where I think this is going to end is Israel's going to lose the so-called demographic war. That's I think the most likely outcome of this.
You spend a lot of time, as do I, talking with Laith Marouf. And what you just laid out in terms of giving some data on post-traumatic stress disorder and the turmoil that the economy is in. And Laith has been very clear, saying, in spite of the Western narrative, Israel lost the fight. That Hamas as a resistance has prevailed, and that the objective of a resistance is different than the objective of the occupier. And so, by all relevant determinants, Hamas has won the fight. Your thoughts?
I think that's an absolutely fair assessment. And it's not just that they continue to have the ability to inflict casualties. And by the way, there was something in the range of 15 Israeli soldiers who were killed in northern Gaza in the last several weeks leading up to the ceasefire, which was a spike. What I think is most notable about the performance of the Israeli military is that even in Beit Hanun, if you look at a map of the Gaza Strip, in the northeastern corner, just across the separation fence from an Israeli settlement called Sderot, there's this area of Gaza known as Beit Hanun. That is probably the most difficult part of Gaza to defend, because it's just right next to Sderot, and there's to the north of it watchtowers and armed forces, and then to the southeast of it, another set of watchtowers and forces. And so it's also the furthest point away from the most populated parts of Gaza. So there are logistical issues, getting, rearming the militants there. You would have thought, just looking at the lay of the land in Gaza, that if there was one part of the Gaza Strip that the Israeli military could secure during this 15 to 16 it would suffer casualties right up until the end of the fighting, just before the ceasefire. So this is a miserable performance. Miserable. They excel at killing women, children, elderly. Oh, they do that really well.
Right.
But what war have they won recently? They didn't defeat Hezbollah. They didn't defeat Ansar Allah, even with all the assistance they received from Western militaries. Iran showed that it can penetrate Israel's air defenses readily with its hypersonic missiles. It struck probably the most protected military asset that Israel has, the Nevatim air base, repeatedly. I mean, I think something like 10 to 15 missiles struck the air base in the last attack by Iran. It has been exposed as a paper tiger that specializes in nothing more than crimes against humanity against civilians. So again, from a military perspective, I talked earlier about the economy. From a military perspective, Israel is in real trouble. And it's now, exhausting itself further by sending its forces deeper into Syria, where it will encounter resistance eventually, and it also has refused to withdraw its forces entirely from Lebanon. So these people do not, I remember Dirty Harry when I was a kid. There was a famous scene where Clint Eastwood looks into a camera and he says, "A man's got to know his limitations."
Yep.
Well, Israelis don't know their limitations, Wilmer. That's my view.
I think he also says in one of the Westerns, dying is a hell of a way to make a living.
You could use that in this context too.
You've mentioned Ansar Allah, and you've mentioned Iran here. And one of the things that I think is very important for people to understand, how Iran has been very, very strategic. You just talked about some of the air bases that it has hit. It has intentionally not struck civilian targets. And they have been very, very strategic in the targets they've selected, and they hit the targets that they fire upon. Ansar Allah is I think can be put into the same category. And recently, we haven't really heard much about Ansar Allah in all of this, as there's discussion through the Trumpian forces that Israel may be planning their next move. That might not be a good idea.
No, Ansar Allah was making considerable headway in targeting sites within Israel itself, including in Tel Aviv, towards the very end. They have demonstrated a capacity to penetrate Israel's air defenses with drones, not just with missiles, but with drones. Israel one thing that I think has emerged from this is that Israel's military technologies are vastly overrated. The so-called Iron Dome, David Sling, and this really, it's not, simply a question of criticizing or ridiculing Israel's military performance. This has serious long-term implications for the willingness of Israelis to stay. If they don't feel that they themselves can be protected from the seething rage that their government has caused throughout the region, then they'll go elsewhere, and they could live. The Jewish population of Israel could live very safely in any Western country, and many of them are citizens of Western countries as well as being citizens of Israel, and a great many of them could obtain citizenship in a Western country or permanent residency, particularly the more educated amongst them. So Israel's got a real problem. How does it convince the people to stay now that it has been exposed as being incapable of protecting its citizens from the indignation of the indigenous population?
Well, in fact, let me see here. Flat Earth makes the point. Islam has specific rules regarding war and engagement, and that is true. And unfortunately, in the West, the fact that Iran is following those rules of engagement is being ignored. A lot of people really don't understand the cultural dynamics at play here, as well as the tactical dynamics, or how the Islamic religious dynamics impact the military. To your point about Israelis and their safety, that is one of the key elements that Netanyahu has been, or Milikowski, depending on how you want to refer to him, by his family Polish name or by the name that they changed to protect the guilty.
I prefer war criminal, but that's just me.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right. That fits. But one of the things that he has always used as one of his points is, I am the one that can protect you from the existential threats. And what has now been exposed is, you're not the guy. And many are saying that he is continuing this fiasco. He is continuing these war crimes because as soon as he stops, he goes to jail.
He goes to jail. He could be overthrown. He could be maybe
all
somebody. Maybe somebody will give him up to the ICC. Who knows? The man's in serious trouble. I follow the Israeli press fairly carefully. It's difficult to stomach a lot of what I read, but there have been bitter complaints in the Israeli press for months from the Israeli settlers who lived in the northern part of the country near the border with Lebanon. For example, the ones who've gone back to Metula, which is both a settlement and a military base. I actually witnessed, when I was in Lebanon last year, an attack by the Islamic resistance on Metula. They struck it repeatedly with artillery shells, not the settlement, the military base, and then they struck it with a thermobaric weapon, which caused a huge explosion. And the reports are the ones who'd been willing to go back, it's just a complete disaster zone, the entire settlement. The same is also true of Kiryat Shimona, which is very close. You can see it from the border of Lebanon. It's just completely demolished. So, there's no buffer zone. The Israeli forces, although they're now on 5 hills near Syria in Lebanon, there's no band of Israeli military forces in the south of Lebanon anymore. So the Islamic resistance forces could go right up to the border and resume what they were doing. And the settlers know that all too well. So certainly amongst that element of the population, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, they think it's laughable that Netanyahu can protect them.
Mm-hmm.
They're enraged because of his failure to do so.
And we've been talking about Iran. Let's shift a little bit because now Netanyahu is talking about attacking Iran with the mother of all bombs. His war cabinet is on the warpath again. And Trump, I believe, has signed off on providing Iran with the mother of all bombs. That again, I could see as only being them signing their own death warrant.
Now, I'm not a military expert, but I've read the reports too about the mother of all bombs being given to Israel. My understanding is that Israel does not have the only aircraft Israel has that could deliver that weapon, because it's such a large and heavy weapon, is a military cargo plane, which would be like a sitting duck in the sky for the Iranian air defenses. So that bomb cannot be delivered to any target in Iran without the direct involvement of the American Air Force. I tend to think that Trump is not crazy enough to go that far, because if he has any competent military advisors telling him what's likely to happen, he will know, first of all, that Israel is going to get obliterated. There's going to be tremendous damage done. And Iran has made clear, if you come after our nuclear facilities, we're going to go after your civilian infrastructure. And secondly, Iran can target American military base in the Middle East. They did that after Trump, the so-called peacemaker, in his first term, assassinated the top Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani. They responded by hitting repeatedly a U.S. military base. And in addition, they can bring the oil trade to a complete halt, the Iranians. They have the easy, those, the refineries, the oil production facilities in states that are allied with the United States in West Asia are also sitting ducks. They can close down the Strait of Hormuz very simply. They could also shut down the Red Sea with the assistance of Ansar Allah, as has happened already. So we are talking about a cataclysm that would make the Iraq war potentially look like a local skirmish, as horrible as that war of aggression was. I think that Trump doesn't want any part of that disaster scenario. His second administration would be remembered for nothing more than the calamity he brought upon the peoples of the region and the global economy if he were to accede to that. So again, I don't know how this is going to play out. It's very, it's tough to predict, because we know that Trump is so supportive of Israel. His natural tendency is to defer and to give Israel whatever goodies it asks for. But we also know that the man is likely to be averse to anything that is going to cause catastrophic damage to the U.S. economy.
There are other elements. I was writing some notes as you were talking because I wanted to be sure that I didn't forget. The other side of this is that Trump is a transactional individual, that he does not seem to have any real guiding ideology that gives you any type of clue or insight into what he bases his logic on. That was one of the reasons why I believe when in 2020, in 2024, when Putin was asked, who would you rather have, Biden or, thank you, Kevin Baptist, thank you for that $10 super sticker. Who would you rather have, Biden or Trump? And he said Biden because Trump is unpredictable. And so to your point about it, we don't even know who's in his ear militarily. So it's hard to figure him out. This takes me back to Hugo Chavez's comment about George W. Bush when he was at the UN. He said, George W. Bush is as dangerous as a monkey with a razor blade. So is Donald Trump, because you don't know what the guy's gonna do.
Right. And so think about how you react if you're a rational actor. And I think the governments of Iran and Russia are rational actors for the most part. Whatever one may think of their, politics, they tend to assess these situations in a cold, hard manner. Mm-hmm. And what you would do, the rational thing to do, is prepare for the worst. If you have a great deal of difficulty predicting how your adversary is going to behave, which is not good for the United States. It's not good for the United States that, the Russian Federation doesn't trust the U.S. government and will prepare for the worst. The Russians haven't forgotten that Trump pulled out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. The Iranians haven't forgotten that Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, the Obama-era nuclear deal, which it was respecting. the Russians haven't forgotten that even though Obama refused to arm Ukraine because he said in this part of the world the Russians have escalation dominance, Trump did send weapons to Ukraine. The guy's a total wild card, which makes it very difficult to enter into any kind of agreement with him or to adopt anything other than an extremely cautious security policy, always preparing for the worst eventuality. So I think Trump believes that his unpredictability is an asset. Perhaps it is in some ways, but it's also a tremendous disadvantage. For one thing, as I said, just gaining the trust of your counterparties is enormously difficult when you behave like Donald Trump.
And to that point, and Shelley H., thank you for that super sticker. Excellent guest. You are correct. Dimitri is definitely an excellent guest. My unpredictability is an asset if it's a strategy. It's a detriment if my unpredictability is because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I think for Donald Trump, it's the latter. He doesn't know. It's the Peter principle. He has been promoted to his level of incompetence.
Right.
So I honestly, he has never demonstrated. I've never really heard him articulate anything that indicates to me that he knows what he's doing.
Right. He's quintessentially dealing with symptoms and not causes. So, the reason why for example, he's seeking an end to the Ukraine war, it's not because he has some kind of principled commitment to peace and he understands the long-term damage that this does to international relations, to the U.S. economy and so forth, and humanity. It's that he just accepts the reality that this war cannot be won in Ukraine. It's over for Ukraine. And any more money sent to the Ukrainians is going to be effectively sunk down a black hole. And there'll be no return on that investment. And at the same time, it was interesting to watch Rubio give that press conference after he met with the Russians.
Wait a minute, hold that thought, because I want to get to that. But there's one more point about the Middle East that I wanted to address before we get there, and that is China. I haven't heard much, if any, in the Western media discussion about where China is in all of this. And I raise that because I think it's important for people to remember that China was the one that brokered the rapprochement between the Saudis and the Iranians. And so China, I think she is sitting back looking at this, but do you have any insight into where is China in all of this unrest?
Well, after the Trump administration, Trump declared his Riviera Gaza plan, the Chinese government, through the foreign ministry, issued a harsh condemnation and rejection of the plan. And in a readout of a meeting with Arab diplomats, said that the diplomats of Arab countries had requested to discuss this situation with the Chinese. And the Chinese, as a result of that, took a very, very firm stand against the ethnic cleansing plan. I mean, we shouldn't even call it a plan, Wilmer. There's no plan here. It's really, it's an objective. His objective is, let's find some place to put them all. Yeah, but what plan does he have? He's got no plan. Right. So the Chinese have, and they've consistently staked out. I mean, one of the most remarkable moments for me in international affairs over the last 16 months was when a Chinese representative told the International Court of Justice in submissions to the court during the South African litigation that the Palestinians have a right of armed resistance. Mm-hmm. That was remarkable. Mm-hmm. I've never heard a leader of a major power say that, and to do it in a judicial setting. And of course, the Chinese are now the biggest trading partner of Saudi Arabia. There's another game in town. It's called the BRICS. Mm-hmm. China has robust trade relationships with a whole range of countries in West Asia, including Egypt and Jordan. So I think the more extreme and unpredictable Donald Trump becomes, the more you're going to see gradually the leaders of these Arab states gravitate into the Chinese sphere of influence, especially if they feel that Trump's ethnic cleansing objective is an existential threat to their regimes.
Now, moving to Ukraine, Trump, and this is where, in fact, I said this to my students today, that a broken clock is right twice a day, as we know. And so as insane and repulsive, I mean, Lindsey Graham told us that Donald Trump is a racist, xenophobic bigot. And I think Lindsey Graham is right. But Trump, through his spokespeople, is telling Zelensky and telling Europe, no Ukraine and NATO for now. Volodymyr, you started this fight. Russia keeps the territory it has captured, and there must be elections. This does not sound to me, Dimitri, like the basis of a peace plan. This sounds to me like surrender. And it's interesting to me, the pushback that's coming from the West regarding these statements about the war. It sounds eerily reminiscent or analogous to the Zionists saying that the conflict in Palestine started on the 7th of October. Dimitri.
Yeah, I just want to correct one thing. When Pete Hegseth, the new defense secretary, yeah, when he gave that speech, and you probably watched it, Wilmer, last week, where he said just point blank, NATO membership is not a realistic alternative here for Ukraine. I don't think he said for now. That sounded to me like he was definitively ruling out ever having the U.S. government's agreement. So they are, I think they're just throwing Zelensky under the bus in every imaginable way. And Zelensky's not helping his cause. He gave this interview where, like, the last 48 hours, I think, where he just basically said, I won't accept any peace deal between the Russians and the Americans. Well, what alternative does he have? What alternative? And and if the United States government wants to normalize relations with Russia, it doesn't need anybody's permission, and certainly not Zelensky's. So the elections, of course, would be certainly a political death sentence for Zelensky. There's absolutely no prospect of him winning an election, which is precisely why he's been ruling by martial law since his term expired, because he knows he wouldn't win an election. So Zelensky's, sorry to be crude about this, he's a dead man walking as far as I can tell. Not just politically, perhaps, physically, the way things are going. And I understand that the Russians have been grooming a fellow by the name of Viktor Medvedchuk, who was the leader of the largest opposition party in Ukraine. I believe it was at the outset of the special military operation in February 2022, and he was arrested and beaten up. And there was a negotiation between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and they allowed him to leave the country. So he's been appearing apparently all over Russian television, giving interviews. I think the way this is going to end, my best guess, Wilmer, is that Zelensky will be replaced by somebody whom the most Ukrainian people would be willing to tolerate. Many would actually support. And that person is going to accept the reality of the situation and will, kind of like what happened in Georgia, after that disastrous war, NATO proxy war that was begun, I think, back in 2003 or so. They're going to have a leader who is going to want to maintain good relations with Russia, not necessarily be on bad terms with Europe, with the EU. Maybe they'd even have, I don't think the Europeans will ever accept Ukraine into the EU, but they could have some kind of economic partnership with the EU as long as militarily they were perfectly neutral and weren't hostile to Russia. I think the Russian government would be happy with that. And I think that's where this is heading. And we're seeing the setup now. All of this, all of this talk about Zelensky having to hold elections and, not inviting him to the table. I mean, you think about it, it's remarkable that he's not even at the table. I think the writing's on the wall. It's over for Zelensky.
Well, and I think Henry Kissinger was right. It's dangerous to be an American enemy. It is detrimental to be an American ally. And Zelensky, I mean, recent history is replete with what happens to a so-called leader once that leader's purpose has been served as far as the United States is concerned. I laughed when Trump made the call to Putin, and part of the readout was Trump saying, well, I'll call Zelensky and bring him up to speed.
About his country. Yeah.
Leave the gun, take the cannoli. But I mean, we're laughing, but you're right. He's not doing himself any favors. And the reason why I say this sounds like surrender, not peace, is because what Donald Trump did was articulate very clearly Russia's security concerns. And President Putin has been very clear. I mean, like him or hate him, but he's been very, very consistent in these are the points that need to be addressed in order for me to stop this. Donald Trump, with the exception, I haven't heard anything about denazification. That's the only point from what I've heard from Donald Trump that isn't what Putin has been demanding. But so it's Donald Trump is basically articulating President Putin's demands. Again, that sounds to me like they need to fire up the USS Missouri and sail that thing into the Black Sea and resurrect Emperor Hirohito, because this is surrender.
That's Trump, to his credit, I'm not a fan of the man by any stretch of the imagination, but to his credit, he has a grip on reality, which is a hell of a lot more you could say about the Democrats. And the problem, I think, all these people confront, Wilmer, whether we're talking about Zelensky or Biden and Kamala Harris, Olaf Scholz, Macron, is these people are so politically invested in total victory that a capitulation is a death sentence for them politically. They've been telling us for 3 years that Ukraine was going to win this war. They undermined a deal, that Istanbul deal that would have allowed Ukraine to retain these 4 oblasts, kept it out of NATO, and saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of men, not to mention who knows how many permanently disabled. The infrastructure that's been destroyed in the country, the economy lies in smoking ruins, the energy grid is barely functioning. All of that could have been avoided if Zelensky had done that deal. And he and these incompetent, depraved buffoons that lead Europe, decided that nothing less than the total defeat and surrender of Russia was acceptable to them after having provoked the war. So they're all finished. They're all on the way out. None of them is going to survive politically, not a single one. And the one advantage that Donald Trump has is he can come along and say, "Hey, man, this is Joe Biden's war. I'm just here to clean up the mess."
Well,
and
in fact,
he's done a very good job of saying just that.
Well, and to that point, because I've said to my students, and I say all the time, that one of Biden's problems was trying to figure out how to exit the mess he started, but find a narrative, a plausible narrative that said we won. And Donald Trump came in and ignored all that and said, "Hey, I didn't start this mess. I don't have to worry about," unlike most other American presidents who would also be concerned about the American exceptionalism and all that kind of foolishness, and having to find a way to say we won. Donald Trump saying, "I'm cutting my losses. I now want to focus on China."
Right.
I think Trump's willingness to get out of this thing as quickly as he can. And by saying publicly, hey, Volodymyr, you started this fight. I mean, he's right, but you started this fight, because he wants to foolishly turn his focus on his ire towards China.
Right. I do want to just point out one other thing. I was going to say this earlier when I went off on a tangent about the Ukraine war. In the Rubio press conference, and Waltz was there and Witkoff, they said over and over again, there are these amazing, fantastic economic opportunities here.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can get beyond the Ukraine war, like they were saying very clearly, this is just a stepping stone to building a business partnership with Russia in certain spheres that can be fabulously profitable for America, by which they mean, of course, large U.S. corporations and the oligarchy, not the people. But that's a detail. So today there was a report, or I think it was yesterday, in the Moscow Times, which is hostile to Vladimir Putin. But it quoted a member of the Russian delegation saying that they came to Saudi Arabia with some kind of proposal about the United States participating in the development of Arctic resources. And, there's believed to be a lot of oil and gas up there. And I think, as I recall, at the time that the sanctions were first imposed on Russia, I think this is all the way back in 2014, ExxonMobil had a very potentially lucrative deal with the Russian Federation. So I think I don't know who initiated this. It's hard to tell whether, somebody on the American side called up the Russians and said, hey, what do you think about reviving that deal with ExxonMobil? Or whether the Russians were prescient enough to say, let's take those goodies with us to Saudi Arabia and sweeten the pot for the United States. But that's clearly now, however it started, based on the press conference, that is a major motivating factor. What they'll then do, and I think, this whole question of how they're going to deal with China, clearly the Americans, the Trump administration wants to pry Russia away from China. I just don't see that happening. I mean, it's just forget about it.
No.
First of all, that would be, it would just be complete lunacy for them to trust. I mean, what if a Democrat comes along later on who thinks like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and replaces Trump? I mean, it'll be full-on war again against the Russian economy. And also I think they've just integrated to a degree with the Chinese economy. There's so much trade between the two countries now that it would be economically ruinous for Russia to sever that relationship. So Trump is going to find himself in an interesting quandary if he does this peace deal and enhances economic relations with Russia, which would be good for both countries. He's still going to have a strategic partnership between China and Russia to confront. And the United States does not have the economic or military ability to defeat those two countries when they are partnered this closely. They just don't.
And one thing that is incredibly obvious to President Putin, dealing with Donald Trump, having dealt with Joe Biden, having dealt with Donald Trump, having dealt with Barack Obama in terms of administrations, is I can't trust what you say, America, and I can't trust what you do, because your foreign policy changes depending the underlying premises of the foreign policy is basically the same. But when the administration changes, everything goes up in the air. And and we know that nature deplores a vacuum. And with a new administration comes vacuums, and he's not going to fall for the banana in the tailpipe trick.
No, I just don't see that, Wilmer. Maybe we'll find out at some point during the Trump administration that Trump can embrace the idea of peaceful coexistence, because that's the reality. Either
that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, they want peaceful coexistence, mutually beneficial economic relationships.
They want competition, not confrontation.
Correct. And competition done according to rules.
And not the rules-based order of Tony Blinken.
Right. According to treaty obligations, international law.
There you go.
That's what they want. And the question's going to be, in my view, is Donald Trump enough of a realist, because ultimately that's the reality he confronts, to embrace that kind of relationship with China and Russia? Or is he going to continue to go down the path of belligerence and hegemony? We're going to find out.
So final question to you on, and again, thank you, because I know it's late for you and I greatly appreciate you. Is the EU, after the United States has blown up Nord Stream, after the United States has deindustrialized Germany, after the United States has forced Europeans to pay an exorbitant amount more for their natural gas, after neoliberalism in Greece, after neoliberalism in Italy, how does the EU still turn to the United States and try to follow the US down this rabbit hole?
Oh man, I wish I knew the, I just got to say, Will.
Oh, don't tell me you don't know the answer, because if you don't know the answer, then nobody knows the answer.
The simple, thank you very much. But I think the simple answer is, with the current crop of leaders, Europe is screwed. And if we can replace these people,
because it's the elite operating against the best interest of their citizens.
Yes, these people know nothing but being vassals. That's all they understand. And now that the overlord has shown his disrespect and contempt for them, they're lost. They don't know what to do. To me, I'm not just a citizen of Canada, I'm a citizen of Europe as well. I'm an EU citizen. To me, one of the most, I'll never forget it. It was perhaps the most embarrassing moment of my adult life I experienced as a European. And that was after J.D. Vance finished giving his speech at the Munich Security Conference. This character who had been apparently the most influential foreign policy advisor to Angela Merkel when she was the German chancellor, and who is now the chair of the Munich Security Conference, after hearing J.D. Vance say, "We no longer have shared values, Europe has gone astray," he started crying. He was standing at the podium, and before he started crying, he pointed out that what he regarded as an admirable leader was Volodymyr Zelensky. I mean, this was, I think, will be etched in the memory of historians when they talk about the self-inflicted wounds and the stunning decline of Europe. As long as these people are in power, there is no hope for this continent.
And based upon what seems to be on the horizon as it relates to the elections in France, the upcoming elections in France, and the upcoming elections in Germany, it's a sad day in Mudville. It's not looking good.
Well, no, it's not looking good.
Okay.
But it's not hopeless. You have Sarah Wagenknecht's party in Germany, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dalinka might be able to experience the left party, a revival. The two of them together could become a significant political force. The left coalition in France did win the biggest number of seats in the last election, but there are indications that Macron has managed to drive a wedge through the two main parties in that coalition, and he kept them out of power just by, ignoring the electoral result. But it's not like the left is dead, and I think it's dormant. I think it's got a lot of work to do to recover the confidence of the European electorate. The damage that was done to the left by people like, Gerhard Schröder, who sold out the workers of Germany, Tony Blair, that contemptible third way hypocrite and war criminal, and now Olaf Scholz. It's going to take a while to prepare, to repair that. And in the interim, we may sadly have to go through some period of, rule by parties like the AfD and the Front National. And that's a scary prospect. It should be very concerning to us all. But that's the situation we're in, unfortunately. And at least those parties appear to be committed to the idea of having good relations with Russia and putting an end to this depraved proxy war. So,
and also to your point, one of the advantages that Europe has that the United States doesn't have is it's a parliamentary system. So there's more space for disparate voices than there are in the United States with a two-party system.
yes, and specifically, a number of jurisdictions in Europe have proportional representation. Canada and the United States have what is known as the first past the post. So, you can get 10% of the vote and end up with a significant presence in the national legislature. So there's that.
Especially if when coalitions have to be formed, your 10%, your small percentage could be the determining factor of who actually is in power. So you are able to extract in those negotiations considerable leverage.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not like the left is entirely powerless in the current political landscape. And if they play their cards right, they can rebuild their standing amongst the electorate and emerge. And ultimately, that's what Europe needs. It needs a true left wing. I would go so far as to say radically left wing. I'm not a communist, but I am a socialist. And there is nothing on the continent anymore which one can fairly describe as socialism. And I think there's a lot of sympathy for a socialist program still in Europe. It's just that we need to explain to our comrades exactly what the benefits of a socialist system are again, and really earn their confidence that we are committed to implementing such a program and aren't going to sell them out.
Dimitri Lascaris, thank you so much again. You stayed up late for me. I really, really, really appreciate it. I know you got to travel. So thank you. And as always, my brother, look forward to having you back.
Thank you, brother. Take care.
Thank you. Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned. New show every day. Misty Winston is going to join us tomorrow from the Misty Winston Show. You're going to get some more incredible analysis from her tomorrow. Also, please follow and subscribe, leave a review. Please share the show. Follow us on social media. You can find all the links below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.